Hey there, this is James Darknell, the Mutant Pixel, and I got another MODO tutorial for you. So this week I want to talk a little bit about adding some random variations to your surfaces using a couple of shader tree tricks. So these are kind of the unsung heroes of the shader tree, and I'm going to be using the texture offset effect with the layer variations item in the shader tree. And it takes a little bit of understanding to really grok how these two functions work. So we're going to work on them individually, and then I'll show you how you can combine them to get a really cool effect. Alright, so first we're going to look at the texture offset. So I'm just going to create some geometry here that I can throw a texture on. Doesn't need to be anything very fancy. That looks pretty good. So I'm just going to center that. And I'm not even going to assign a material. We're just going to jump into the shader tree here. And I'm going to add an image map. So any image map will do. I'll just get this cute little koala guy here. So what I'm going to add here is I'm going to go into the procedural textures here. And I'm just going to add a noise, a standard noise layer. And in order to actually see what's going on here, we want to open up a preview, because this is all sort of rendering effects. So just to make sure that this is all rendering out fast enough, yeah, I want to make sure I've disabled global illumination just to make sure that preview is nice and fast to see all of this. Alright, so now that we have this noise texture, you can see how it has these sort of black or sort of dark gray and these light gray areas that sort of fade in and out from each other. What those are going to do is those different areas are going to distort the image that's directly above this. So what we do is we go here to the effect column. I'm going to right click on this, and I think it is under shader controls. Now you're not going to see this, it's right off the screen here, but this is called a texture offset. And now I need to move this directly underneath the koala. So now you can see that those dark areas are sort of shifting at one direction, and the light areas are shifting it the other direction. So there's a couple ways that you can control the strength of this effect. One of the easiest ways is just to adjust the opacity of the layer. So you can see as I reduce the opacity, I'll just slide this really slow so preview can keep up. You can kind of see what's happening. So the more opaque the layer gets, the more it's going to be offsetting it. Or you can just go in, and since this actually uses the color values, we can... So I can hold down shift, and I can adjust all of these together. So by changing this value, you can actually see that that also affects the strength. And if we go in here and we use the floating point, and we can get really crazy values, and then just create, you know, crazy textures like this. So it's just offsetting it that amount. And like I said, we can go back in here and adjust the opacity too, to see the degree that it is displacing that texture. So you might think, well, that's not very useful. I can destroy a bitmap image, but it's actually also sort of interesting if we go in here and we add, say, like a cellular texture. So you can see what it's done to the cellular texture. That's what it looks like. This sort of the traditional cellular look. And as I increase this opacity here, we get this much rougher looking texture on there. So you can imagine using all kinds of different procedural textures to sort of offset other texture layers to get these sort of interesting, almost new procedural textures. So, and one of the cool things about the texture offset layer here is I'm going to turn these off and turn my koala back on. Now I want to quickly add a constant layer here under processing, and I'm going to put this under my koala, set that also to texture offset. So now, actually, we have a lot of control about the way the texture offset works. You should understand that a value, a mid-gray value, 50% gray, doesn't affect the image at all. So now if we affect these, or if we adjust these values one at a time, you can see that red, if we take away at red or add red, that moves it left and right. And the green value, if we take away and add green to it, that moves it up and down. So the red channel is left and right movement, the green channel is up and down, and then the blue channel should be in and out. And this is a little quirk. I don't know if this is a bug or this is intentional behavior, but I'm just going to turn on this cellular texture again and go back to my constant. And then now you can see that I get left and right movement on the red, and actually it's blue that gives me the up and down movement, and green gives me the in and out. So since procedural textures are three-dimensional, we can actually undulate them up and down using the third value. But bitmap images only have two axes, so it's probably the first two colors are why that works for those two axes. So I found, say for the koala image, and I can explain why this value is the one that was selected for it. But I can say that if you want to offset something 100%, it would be a value of 5 either direction. So since it's offset 50% for gray, then it's 5.5 for the maximum offset, 100%. You can see as I move that down. And that would be negative 4.5 would be the opposite direction 100%. So it's 5 in either direction, but it's offset by that 50%. So that's why it's negative 4.5 and 5.5 in the other direction. And that works the same for up and down and the in and out value as well. So I have to say that when I'm assigning textures, I'm mostly using either the solid projection type or I'm using a UV map. So that 5.5 value, that offsets the UV value 100%. So if you're using another type of projection to apply your texture, your results may vary. I have not tested this on all of the various options that are available there, so I know that it works this way with UV maps and with the solid projections of the procedural textures. So that is the texture offset. So now I want to jump in and I'm going to create another quickie new scene here. And I'm just going to draw a little bit of geometry up here. So you see I just have one mesh layer and I'm in polygons mode. So Q to drop that. Now I'm just going to create an array, just duplicate, and we'll just move this out a little bit so that we can see very easily that these are all their own sort of individual little planes. And I'm going to give them all their own surface. So we're going to call this little planes. I already have the name there. So now if we jump into the shader tree, we're going to be taking a look at the variations texture. So that is under add layers, processing, and variations texture. So depending on what your layer effect is, this is going to be diffuse color. We're going to go in and we're going to adjust the color values here. So I'm going to open this in the editor, and we're going to give this sort of a nice deep red color. And then at 100%, I'm going to middle mouse button click here to create a new key in my gradient editor. And I'm just going to give this a green color. So we can sort of zoom in all those. I just hit the A key to zoom in on my gradient editor. So now we just have a nice gradient going between red and green, and I think I actually want this to be linear between them instead of smooth, so I'm just going to click the linear key button there. So now this is another thing that we're going to need preview in order to be able to see. So I'm going to open up my preview here and look at my planes. Now without the variations texture, you can see any color that you apply to here is just going to apply to all of them because they all have the same material setting. They all have only one shader tree layer, one material tag. So when I turn on my variations texture here, you're going to say, well, they're still all the same. Well, we need to set the variation source. So if we were using a replicator or something of that sort, or doing actual particles, we want to set our variation source to particle. If we're doing texture replicators, we want to do texture particle. But in this instance, we want to do mesh part. So these would be individual parts within a single item layer. So I'm going to select that. So now you can see that they're sort of randomized on each one of these little mesh groups, that it's just grabbing a color randomly between 0 and 100%, and then assigning it to that part. So that was just a really easy way. We got one shader tree layer that we've put inside of here to add the variation to all these various objects. So this might look a little weird. Maybe this is cool for if you're doing a tree and you have a bunch of leaves and you want to get sort of random variations, but sometimes you want to have very specific colors. So that is also very easy to do. So I'm just going to add a few more keys in here by middle mouse button clicking. We'll get some colors. So now if I select all of these keys that I've put for these various colors, I'm going to go to the stepped key mode. So this is only going to give me, I'm all selected, just one of each color. So let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 colors. So I need to go 20% for each one of these. 40, so that way there'll be an even distribution. 60, 80. So now if we close our gradient, you'll see that we're just getting an even distribution of those colors that we've selected in our gradient. And the cool thing about doing it this way is, say we wanted most of them to be green, we could just adjust this so that the line, the little gradient, is mostly green. You can just sort of scale this down. And then you can see now most of them are showing up green. So you can control the amount of them. You know, more of them will be one color if you give it more prominence in your gradient. So that really is the variations texture in a nutshell. So what's really cool is we can combine the texture offset in a very controlled manner with the variations texture to create some really cool effects. Here, let me show you this. So I'm just going to jump into this scene right here. And what I've done is I've just done exactly what I did before. I have a polygon here. It basically represents a plank. And I've UV mapped this. Let me just show you the UV map. So I just have a thin UV map here in the middle of my wood texture. And then I've just duplicated this. And I don't want to have to sit here and adjust each one of these planes individually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to add the processing variations texture into here. And I'm going to set this as texture offset. So since the texture offset is using a color, again, I'm going to go in and adjust the color gradient, and I'm going to open that in my editor. Make sure that our color values are selected. So we'll select the first. So keep in mind that 50% is unaffected. So we can go in here. So that's no texture offset. And we only want it to move left and right. So we've already surmised that the red channel does the horizontal variation. So I'm going to select just the red channel now, and I'm going to move that up. And then at 100%, I'm going to middle mouse button click and then move that down. And I want those to be linear so I don't weight the values. So now this is another thing where we need to have the preview window open. Open up our preview. So now with our variations texture set to texture offset, if we do this to mesh part, now you see it's already randomly varying the position of that UV. So for each one of these, it's pushing off the distance across the UV map. And we can actually sort of go in here and increase this value even more to get more variation. And if we had a seamless texture, you see I was kind of getting a seam inside of here, right there. You can either sit here and sort of adjust it so you don't get any seams, or you can use a seamless texture. So that way when it overlaps across that seam, you wouldn't see the seam. So right there, we're getting a lot of variation. We've only added one extra shader tree layer, and we only have one item that's in our items list. So it really can simplify your scenes and add some nice random variation without you having to do a whole bunch of work. All right, so this last thing I want to show you is to get even more control over adding textures to replicators, particles, that sort of stuff. So let me open up this other scene I have here. So let's take a look at this. So this is just a flat polygon with a photo mapped onto it, and this is the UV map. And I will show you the shader tree here. So I've just called this plane. Let me get rid of this variations texture here. I'll just delete that out. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So now if we select this picture, you see I have one image, and I've just put a grid of pictures on here. So I have 9 photos in here, but it's all in one image. And I've basically scaled the UV map so it is just seeing one of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the texture offset to control basically the offset of each one of these little texture positions. So let's go in here and build our little scene first so we can sort of demonstrate this. So I'm going to add an item in here. I'm going to go to particles, point cloud, and I'm just going to add the default point cloud in there. And then I'm going to add a particle replicator. And then within the replicator, we're going to go to prototype is going to be the mesh, that little mesh that I've created there. And the point source is going to be the particle cloud. So if we open up the replicator here, so we're just going to have exact duplicates here floating in space of that little picture. So what we want to do is we want to offset some of those so that we get some nice variations in it. So the way we are going to do that is I'm going to add that processing variations texture. I'm going to set that to the texture offset. Now here's where it starts to get a little bit tricky. So if we go into this editor, and I don't know if you recall, but I said that the value that gets you 100% UV offset is 5, and with the 0.5 added, 5.5, because 50% is no adjustment. Yeah, there we go. And then at 100%, we want to add negative 4.5. So we'll make those linear between those. Now we also want it to go up and down. So at 100, this one we're also going to be making 5.5, and this one negative 4.5. And then our B value, since this is a 2D image, that is just going to be 0.5. All right. So now the problem that we're seeing is it's just randomly grabbing some value, and it's not necessarily locking in to specific values. So you're getting lots of scenes showing up in here. I think to make this a little bit easier to see, I'm going to turn up the brightness on my directional light. Alright, now we can see more easily what's going on here. So we really only want one picture mapped to each replicator item on there. So the way we're going to do that is I have 9 pictures, so I need to create 9 positions along the gradient. Alright, so I'm just going to middle mouse button click on here to create the 9 positions for each one of these. So these are each going to roughly be at about 10%. So, and if we take calculator, I'll open up calculator really quick. And I have 100, and I have 9 variations. Oops. 100 divided by 9 is 11.11. So every 11.11 positions along the gradient if we want to have these evenly distributed. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to set this input to 11.11. That is not 11.11. 11.11. 22.22. 33.33. So this can get a little bit tedious doing this, but you only have to do it once, and then you can save these layers out as presets. So you could say 9 variations, 24 variations, and then the next time you need this, you just pull that preset into your shader tree, and you've only had to create it that one time. So this is going to be 55.55. The rest of these should be easy to guess. Okay, so now that we have all of our divisions evenly across our gradient, now we want to start creating our values that we're going to have the offset. So we don't want to offset at 100%. We already know that 5.5 pushes the UV value 100%, but we only want to push it a third of that way because of the way that we've built our UV map. So I'm going to open calculator here, and we're going to take 5.5, and we want to take off that offset, that 50% gray offset. So I'm going to say minus 0.5. It's going to get us 5. Now we want to divide this by 3 for the 33%. So divide that by 3. So that's 1.6. Now we need to add back in that offset. So plus 0.5. So it's 2.166. So that is the amount of offset that we want to do. So if I take the red channel and I take 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 1. Hold down shift. So 1, 2, 3, select 1, 2, 3, select 1, 2, 3. So these I all want to have the value of that 2.1666. Now these second ones, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 here. These are all going to have a value of 0 for no offset. Now these guys, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. These, we're going to need the calculator again. So we're going to have the 5.5 minus 0.5 equals 5. Divide by 3 equals, and we want this to be the negative value, plus 0.5. So that'll be negative 1.166. So we want this to be negative 1.166666 for that. And we want all of these values to be stair-stepped. So now we're going to be getting each one of these. So these values actually aren't going to be 0. That is where I made my mistake. Those are actually going to be 0.5. No, 0.5. All right. Now we're going to go into the green channel, and we want these 3 to be the 2.1666666. These three are going to be 0.5, and these three are going to be the negative 1.16666. And these values are also all going to be, this is going to be back to stair-stepped, so 0.5. Select all these and stair-step those. Alright, so now between each one of those we have all of the different variations. 0.5. Alright, so now with our stair stepping it looks like it's working. So it's pulling one of those pictures by offsetting it that amount. So we're not getting any seams, it's pushing it off. You can see we're getting some shadows on there. So if I take my directional light and I turn the spread angle up, or I can just turn off shadows altogether for just now. Now you can see that we have a replicator from one object. So we have one object, a particle cloud, a replicator. We have one shader tree layer and the variations texture set to texture offset. And we've just basically encoded all of the images that we needed for our texture replicator, or for our replicator, excuse me, and put them all into the one image. And it offsets each one that very specific amount sort of randomly per particle. So this time it has worked because we've set it per particle because we were using a particle. If we put it to mesh part, obviously you can see that it's not working. So this is definitely going to be an instant. We're going to want to be using the variation source as the particle. So that was using a variations texture with a texture offset to add randomness to your replicators. Hope you like it. Thanks for watching.
Hey, that was pretty cool.